Hi, welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 2 of the build series on the Boomerang RC Jets Atom. In the first segment we went over the components of the airplane and our initial impressions of packing and quality and some of the equipment we were going to use. In this video I go through some of the actual build steps. I wouldn't describe it as a detailed, every step of the build. We do cover quite a few of interesting build steps. There is a segment in here on some difficulties and challenges we had with the landing gear controller. If you recall in the first video, we said we were going to use a landing gear controller from Asan called the AG68, which is a combined controller, nose steering gyro, and differential brake gyro. So we've had some difficulties getting that to work. So there is a segment in this build video that goes into pretty much detail on some of the challenges we've had and how we solved the problem. It's a hybrid solution. I may get some feedback that it's not a great solution, but it works for me. Hope you enjoy the video. Drop a comment, subscribe, like. I don't do these videos too often because I'm not doing builds every month. But hopefully one of these days I can do more frequent builds so I can do more frequent build videos. Anyway, thanks for watching. Enjoy the video, and at the end of this video I'll probably just do a little closeout segment. I thought the first thing I'd cover in the build is what I find to be the most challenging part of the build, which is installing the servos that are going to control the thrust vectoring. The manual that has pretty good pictures, I'll show you those in a minute, and some good text. But in terms of actually getting this stuff installed, it has proved a little bit challenging to me. So I'm just going to walk us through. What we start with is assembling the push rods themselves. So the kit comes with the carbon fiber rods and the threaded portion for each end. And actually assembling the rod is not covered in the manual, but if you've been through a build similar to this, it's a fairly straightforward thing. If you get at least an inch of the threaded portion into the carbon rod here, and just use a good quality epoxy, a slow cure epoxy, something that's going to be a 4 to 6 hour set time, and let that get nice and firm. And then, so that's step A of the build, is getting the push rods actually assembled. So next it says to build the control rods so that the pitch control rod is 22.5 inches and the yaw control rod is roughly 26.25 inches. And that should be a starting point, and you should leave yourself enough room at the threaded ends to make adjustments. So we can see mine are 22.5 and 26.5 roughly. Once I get these installed, we'll have to figure out where we need adjustments. Remember in the first video I said the attachment that goes on the control horn on the nozzle itself I removed. So this is what it looks like, and once it's installed, the C-clips that retain it click here and on the other side. So I haven't actually tried reinstalling the C-clips yet. We'll get to that after we're satisfied that the control rod lengths are right and that the servos are moving in the right direction and that the nozzle is moving well. And then finally the components of the servos themselves and the mounting trays. And in addition to getting the rods installed as being a challenge, the trays themselves, for example, we're going to look at the manual in a second. This tray, after the servo is mounted, gets mounted on the upper side of the fuselage, so basically mounted, glued in place in the roof. So not only do you have to figure out exactly where it needs to go based on your push rod length, but then you need to get a glue that's going to hold it in place long enough for the glue to set. So what I think I'm going to end up doing is flipping the fuselage upside down while I do this install. And the only challenge there is accessing the inside of the fuselage when it's upside down. Is you sort of have to get on the floor and work your way up. So as I do the actual install, we'll see how that all works. So that's the beginning part of the components we need to do the thrust vectoring install. Here's a picture from the build guide of the pitch servo mounted in the fuselage. And if you can see, it's just above the bell housing. So, and you kind of have to mount it with the bell housing installed, with the thrust tube installed, to make sure you get your length right. So a little bit of a challenge, not just in getting it lined up, but getting my big fat hands in there is going to prove to be a challenge, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so I have the servo installed to control the vector nozzle on pitch, and I have the servo installed for yaw. One thing I should point out is the build guide has the yaw servo on the right side of the fuselage, but as we noticed when we unpacked everything, the nozzle itself came configured with the yaw control horn on the left side. So fortunately that wasn't too hard a change to make. The plywood parts that came were easily flipped, and show you the business end. Everything's working. Okay, so I got the C-clips back on, which was an actual miracle. And then once the C-clips are on, I put a little goo, E6000 goo on it, so those C-clips will not come off. Thrust vectoring is done, and now we go into the other parts of the airplane, and should be smooth sailing from here. In this video segment, I'm going through some troubleshooting that I'm having with either the gear itself or the gear controller. Now, this AG68 brake gyro is not the standard equipment, not the standard gear controller that came with the Boomerang RC Jets Atom. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the symptoms I'm seeing is when I cycle the gear, the main gear always work very consistently. They always cycle down, they always cycle up, never any issue. On command from the transmitter, they always work. The nose gear will always extend when the extend command is issued, and will retract on the first cycle of retraction that we test. But if we extend a second time and then try to retract a second time, the nose gear fails to retract. So I'm just going to go through the troubleshooting steps that I've gone through, and hopefully together we can figure out if there's a problem with the gear, a problem with the controller, or a problem with how I programmed the controller. So stand by. So we're powering up the system. You saw those fast blue and red flashing lights, and now we see slow flashing blue and red lights. The fast flashing lights told us that the AG68 was booting up. So now that it's booted up, the slow lights tell us this. The slow blue flashing light is telling us that the gear is in the retracted position, and the slow red light tells us there's zero brake applied. Just to show you what I'm talking about here, if I apply a little bit of brake, we can see that that light goes completely red and stays solid. If I remove the brake, it goes back to flashing red. All right, so now what I'm going to do is extend the gear, and we should see, and what I want to pay attention to in this troubleshooting video are the indicator lights for the two mains and the nose. The nose gear is the middle one, and that's the black connector. The right gear is the red one with the green tape on it, and the left gear is the red one with no tape on it. So here we go, we're going to extend. Notice how all three lights come on, and when they reach the end of their travel, the lights all go out within 1 second, which according to the manual, or according to the instruction sheet, exactly what we're supposed to see to make sure that there's not an over amperage being applied. So as each gear reached its end of travel, within 1 second, those blue lights went out. The solid blue light we see now in the lower left tells us that gear are extended and that my rudder stick or my steering stick is centered and not deflected. I can show you it goes to blinking if I deflect the stick left or right, and if I'm centered, it's fine. All right, now we're going to do a retract operation. And notice the nose gear failed to retract. And the light, and I want to point out that that center light, it came on for a second. Actually, I'm going to extend again. By the way, that center light is not illuminated. That's just glare from the other two lights. Watch the center light. I'm going to point it out real quick. Watch the center light. When I do the retract, it will come on just for a second, and then it will go right back out. It will stop delivering amperage to the retract because it's going to detect it's stalled. Oh, look at that. And now the nose gear came up. All right. Okay, we're going to extend again. All three lights are on. And those lights going out in order, left, middle, right, or really follow the order in which the gear reached their maximum extension, and they all went out within a second. I'm going to wait a minute or two, or I'm going to wait a few seconds anyway, and try to bring the gear up again. And this is part of the problem I'm having. The nose gear does not come up consistently. So let's watch that center light again. So the center light came on and went out immediately. And even though the main gear are now retracted, the nose gear is not retracted. So it did deliver amperage, or tried to. It probably detected a stall, and it did not retract the gear. So extending one more time. And now we're going to try to retract again. And nose gear won't retract. Now, I'm going to extend one more time so that way my mains and my nose are all in an extended position. And now I'm going to power cycle the system, so I'm turning the system off, turning the system back on, and I'm going to attempt a retract operation. Okay, nose gear failed to retract. Now I'm going to extend. Now I'm going to wait fully a minute. Okay, a minute has gone by since we extended. Now we're going to try retract. Again, the nose gear is not retracting. I'm going to immediately extend. And then I'm going to power cycle the system. And now the nose gear is coming up. So I'm going to cut to the next thing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the ports. So I'm going to put the nose gear in the left-hand port and the left main gear in the center port. See if there's any difference in operation. In this fast forward section, basically what we did was try every gear on every port to see if we could pinpoint a problem perhaps with the controller. In all cases, the main gear always worked perfectly and the nose gear worked inconsistently. This tells us either there's a problem with the nose gear or there's a problem with how much power the AG68 is providing to the nose gear. Attempting to retract. Okay, powering down. We're going to move on to our next test. Okay, so I took the gear out of the airplane And I hooked it up. I'll just show you what I've got it hooked up to. The standard controller that came with the kit. I've got it programmed into a completely different airplane in the radio, hooked up to a different receiver. And we can watch it move freely. Up, down, up, down. So I think we can conclude the gear is working. So now we have to go back to look at programming on the Asan AG68. Okay, so I have this wired up now where I'm using the standard controller that came with the kit to control the up and down on the landing gear, and I'm using the AG68 just as a gyro. And my next trick, I'm going to try to plug the brakes back into the AG68 and see how that works. But if this works, I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to give up on trying to figure out what, if any, programming problems exist within the AG68. Okay, here's my final hybrid solution on landing gear control. As we've talked about earlier in the video, the gear controller that comes with the kit is this red one, and it works fine. It raises and lowers the gear, and it provides positive braking in a proportional way. The AG68 is an aftermarket product that many people buy, and it's a gear controller, so it raises and lowers the gear. It also provides a gyro for both steering and differential braking. Since I was having so much trouble with the AG68 consistently raising and lowering the nose gear, I've gone with this hybrid solution. So basically what I've got now is I've got the standard controller handling the raising and lowering of the gear only, and I have the AG68 handling nose steering and differential braking and gyro function. So I'll have to test this out in the field, but I think this is going to work just fine. I hope one day I get to figure out if it's something that I'm doing wrong with configuring the AG68. I hope somebody can educate me there. But for now, I think this solution will work. Okay, here's the bottom floor installed. In fact, there was a little bit of confusion. I mentioned, I think in my opening video, there were 4 guys in our local club who are building this particular plane, the Atom. And some of us are installing this tray facing the other direction. Just for context, this is the tail of the airplane. This is the nose of the airplane. The holes for mounting are lined up to install it this way. However, it really does make more sense to install it the other way. So I think maybe there was just a mistake in how the holes were drilled. Anyway, I'm not going to change this around because I've already got my power box and my landing gear controller and gyro all in place. So that's how it's going to be. But so that's in, and just a little comment about, there's just a little confusion between what came with the kits and what's in the instruction manual. But you would expect this on a first run. So we're all having fun doing our builds. Here we have the battery tray that goes into the nose. It comes pre-cut, and these 2 shaped pieces have to be glued in place. These are balsa. So once this is installed in the nose, it gets epoxied in place, and then it will hold the batteries. So I've trial fit it. I marked its location with a Sharpie because as it's in there, you do need to be able to clear the nose gear up and down. So I've already measured for that. So next step now is I will just epoxy this in place, and then this will hold our batteries. Here's the fuel cell floor, and if you look in the manual, there's actually 2 pieces to this assembly. I did not show the actual assembly of the two parts, but there's the floor itself, and then there's this piece down here, which is the support that holds it up so it stays level. When you install it, the shape of the floor fits into a fitting that's in the fuselage. There's one on each side. The front brace is glued to the floor itself and then epoxied in place. So that's a pretty straightforward operation. A couple of other things. Whenever I build anything that's going to hold a fuel cell in place, I always put this rubberized drawer liner with double-sided tape, so that way when it's Velcroed down, it's going to have less of a tendency to slide forward and back. I know some guys use Velcro. I don't like using Velcro on my tanks, so I use the rubberized drawer liner instead. Okay, all of our servo wires run from the back, all shielded by high heat protective loom, at least under the engine, and up near where the thrust tube is, where there's a lot of heat generated. We have that all protected. There's still some wire cleanup to do up front, obviously. Tail feathers are servoed up, wires are run, and these things are affixed. By the way, those clamping screws that I said I was worried about, or that I had concerns about, it's really a good technique for affixing flying surfaces to the airframe. Hint for those of you doing this project, run the wires for your tail feathers before you do everything related to the thrust tube and the thrust vectoring, because running those wires after that stuff was installed took me a really long time. So that's where we are now. More updates to follow soon. Okay, this is an item classified under odds and ends. The manual says that the center of gravity is 195 millimeters from the leading edge of the wing at the root. So the red tape on the left-hand side of the picture here is what I marked when I had the wing mounted. At the center of that silver tape line is 195 millimeters. So what I can determine from that is that the center of gravity is right at the center of the spar tube, which should make measuring using my old school string method pretty straightforward. At least that's how I'm going to start. And then, as we get these ready for maidens, at least within my club, we'll compare notes and see where we all stand. The wing panels are a fairly straightforward process to put together. I'll go through a couple of things that I discovered. The wing root, you can see this here. It comes with like fiberglass that just has a small opening. So I just open up this whole area because there's really nothing structural there. And it gives me clear access to the openings inside the framework where you can run the wires. So you can see this yellow goldenrod here. I found the route that puts me through the flap bay and the aileron bay. And then the landing gear, it's got the landing gear wire and the landing gear brake wire. That's a pretty short run into the aileron bay. And then what we'll do is route these really long wires back through here. And everything should come out right about here. And then once we have that done, I'll show you how I do the final hookup of the 4-port connector, and then getting that embedded, because this is the area where the connector lines up with the hole in the fuselage, right behind the spar tube. So I'm going to go ahead and pull some wires, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so pulling the wires was pretty easy. So the longest one, and I did have to add a 6-inch extension to get it out to here. On the aileron servo, no extension on the flap servo. And the 2 wires for the landing gear, both the landing gear control and the brake control, were plenty long enough that we routed them up into the aileron bay. and then looped back and brought them all down. So they all cross through on the flap bay, and they're all protected with this snake skin. So as it passes through these ribs where there's some sharp edges, at least the wires should not get damaged in flight. So that's where we are now. I'll go ahead and get these positioned, and let's see. We'll get these positioned and in place, screwed down, and then I'll work on the landing gear. All right, here's the wing panel finished. All covers back on, control rods in place. If you notice here, I just used some Blend-Derm tape just to close the opening so this wire protruding out is not going to wander around too much. So I think we're in good shape. Hey, I want to point out a couple of things real quick on the hardware that comes with the kit. I was pretty impressed that there was very little in the way of Phillips head tapping screws. Most of the self-tapping screws are a hex head that takes usually a 2mm drive. And I can't tell you how happy I was to see that, because most of the kits that come from overseas that come with screws, most of the hardware is great. For some reason, the overseas Phillips head screws just are not very good. So shout out to Boomerang RC Jets for including more of the hex head screws than Phillips head screws. By the way, most guys who are doing these builds on even a semi-regular basis, we usually keep a supply of better quality hardware in our shops. I get my stuff from RTL Fasteners in Virginia, and I think their stuff is just great. So when I do need extra hardware or just replacement hardware, I've just got it at my fingertips. Here we have everything completed, everything installed, and everything working. We still have a little bit of programming to do on our radio for flap and elevator trim, and how we're going to control our thrust vectoring. And I will probably make a special video on the Powerbox core transmitter setup. That won't be everybody's cup of tea, but if you are interested in that, I'll show you how we did that. So what do we have here? We have our 2 receiver batteries up front. We have our turbine battery. And what we did is we did hard glue in connecting receptacles for all of these, so we're not fooling around with wires, flopping around after we put our batteries in. And then the 4th battery here is to control our landing gear controller. And if you remember, the landing gear controller, I had to really do a hybrid solution, so I actually have 2 controllers. They're running off a single battery, because one of the controllers that's controlling the landing gear itself will use most of the juice in that battery. The other controller is basically just using juice to control the gyro, which should not consume that much. Let's see, up here, what do we have? Our UAT, our engine control unit, our engine monitoring unit, our radio on-off switch, radio system monitor, fuel pump, fuel valve, connection to our tanks, a filler valve. I kind of like this solution. This is from Jersey Modeler. If you know their equipment, this is a dry brake fitting. So when the fill tube is removed, fuel will not flow out of this. It's a dry brake fitting, so keeping it inside the fuselage is not dangerous. The JetTech fuel cell that I described in one of the earlier videos. Let's see what else we've got. Swewin 170 installed. I'm not going to show you the thrust tube because I've shown you that several times. And I think that's about it. I'm going to give us some closing thoughts on this. And generally, this was a fun build. All right, well, that wraps it up for our construction video of the Boomerang RC Jets Atom. A few final comments. Great kit. I think the guys at Boomerang RC Jets, who've been in the business a long time, This was a new design for them, maybe new manufacturing techniques. Came out great. And the customer service at Boomerang really deserves a shout out here, because I think I mentioned in the first video that when the kit arrived, it was missing some parts that just didn't get put into the box when it came out of the factory. And those guys really went out of their way to get their hands on the parts, to get them in our hands so we can complete our builds. As far as value is concerned, for this size aircraft, an all composite jet, to include the wing bags, which I showed in the first video, the price point is really good. Really, it's a very hard price to beat. Last year, I did a review of the Predator 2.2 meter jet from Pilot RC, and I said at that time I thought it was a good value, but I think the Boomerang guys have raised the bar a little bit in providing value for the dollar. So good job, guys. I'm really looking forward to getting this one out to the field to give it a flight. If you have any final questions, if I didn't cover anything that you think is important, drop me a note in the comments section of the video, and I'll see if I can't address them either by replying to your comment or making a short subject video on it. So again, thanks for watching. If you like what you see on the channel, please subscribe, like the video. Again, I'm a small channel, I'm a new channel, but any subscriber, any like, it helps the algorithm, and maybe someday it will enable me to be able to do more of these videos and maybe do more sophisticated builds. So again, thanks for watching. Hope to see you the next time. Safe flying out there. Bye.